I really liked design as a kid. It was just something that came relatively naturally to me. You need to know the things to do your job, but if you know people, it makes your life easier. I didn't know if the fast-paced nature of the city was for me, but when you come from quite far away, unless you've got a job, I think the difficulty is like, how are you going to afford things if you don't have any money coming in?
Today's guest grew up in Bolton, in a working class family, and is now a senior designer at Just Eat. His passion for design started early, despite pressure to follow a traditional academic path. With family support, he pursued his dream, leveraging a crucial work experience opportunity during university to break into the industry. Over the past decade, he's worked with diverse companies like PlayStation, Disney, and Just Eat, observing class and ethnic dynamics within the industry. He finds his working class roots and diverse background give him a unique edge, especially in environments where class divides are less pronounced. Reflecting on education, he suggests that shorter, focused courses can be more effective than university for a design career, emphasising the value of practical experience and a resilient mindset shaped by his upbringing. Jay, how was that? Was that a bit spot on?
Yeah, that was great.
That's good to know. Good to know. So, yeah, could you briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what your role is and what you're up to now?
Yeah, sure. Um, Hi, I'm Jay, everyone. And so I'm currently a senior digital designer at justeattakeaway.com, which is one of the biggest uh, technological food delivery companies in the world. So my role, I work as a CRM and digital designer. So I essentially create emails and digital um, design banners for the company, which ranges from a variety of different platforms that it will be showcased on, from the emails that you receive in your devices to banners you'll see on websites, anything and everything to do with Just Eat and the convenience of being able to get things delivered to your home. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I kind of do at the moment.
Yeah, so this series is about working classes within creative industry and those from low socio-economic backgrounds. How would you define working class? What would you say it means to you?
It's an interesting one. So working class to me is someone that has a pretty much a labor job or a manual labor job, and it's just something from where I grew up, I guess. Uh, Someone that kind of works hard to kind of bring in the money in some way, shape, or form. Typically speaking, somebody that would be working class is somebody that we may not have had a formal form of education, and ultimately just needed to work to provide for their family. And that's kind of how I see working class. I think it might be slightly different now in this current kind of era and world that we live in, but I still think that is still applicable from kind of where I grew up, at least.
In the intro, we talked about like how you had a how you wanted to get into like creative field. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what kind of drove you to go that route as opposed to the academic route?
Yeah, so I really liked design as a kid. It was just something that came relatively naturally to me. I enjoyed it. It was quite fun. And my parents obviously wanted me, being an Indian person, wanted me to go down a pretty kind of academic route, be it maths or science, so be a doctor or or an accountant. Um, and it was like they wanted to live their lives through me vicariously. And but obviously at the same time they wanted us to do what's best for us. But for me, I wanted to do something that I really enjoyed, and I think it was a combination of my parents. One parent obviously telling me that they wanted me to go down one route, and one which gave me a little bit more freedom. So as a result, I was just like, well, if I can get the freedom and enjoy something I like doing, why wouldn't I do that? And just one thing after another, I think it came to me quite naturally, and it was just something I really enjoyed. So it was kind of an easy route, really.
Okay. How ultimately how did they feel when you kind of went into the creative route? Because like you said, they kind of wanted you to go more the academic, but I suppose they're kind of coming from a working class
Yeah.
background. So for you to go the creative route, I suppose in their mind, there's no guarantee of success or
Yeah, I think they did know what. Firstly, there's probably no guarantee of success based on what their measurements are of what success is. And quite frankly, I'll be honest, at the time, that's not something that I had in my mind. It wasn't, I want to make a lot of money. I want to do something that I enjoy doing. And I think that's what it should always be in any given circumstance. But I think there was obviously my mum in particular was very much so very supportive, as was my dad. But I think my dad had a certain idea in his mind as to the route that he wanted us to go down because he wasn't able to have that opportunity. So he assumed that that's what we wanted, me and my brother at least. Um, but we had obviously we still had their both full support. But I think it took them a little while to understand that this is not what you know what they wanted for us,
yeah.
but at the same time, it's what's best for us as well in a weird way, because like we're not doing things just because they've said to do it. We're doing things because we actually want to do them.
So in terms of breaking into the industry and kind of the route that you wanted to take, how did you decide actually, yeah, this is the route I want to go. I want to go into the creative field.
Um, I think it's a combination of things, really. So I I did different disciplines of design growing up. So if I roll back the years to when I was in like high school, I did a mixture of graphic design and product design, and I think the idea of being having the ability to create something new and have your own mark on it was fantastic in my eyes because I could really bring a level of creativity that I at the time didn't think anybody else could do, um, because I was only ever kind of comparing myself to my peers at the time. And then you move on to say sixth form college, and you're now in a pool of people that are maybe equally as talented, if not more talented than you. So you push yourself even more, so then you can, you know, healthy competition. You try and one up them in some way, shape, or form. But it also opened my eyes into more type of graphic design because for so long I'd only been exposed to what I knew and the
Mm.
environment I was in. And then obviously, as the years go on, you go to university and you kind of engage in a plethora of different types of designs and different types of people from all over the world. And it was a really good experience because you learn so much from people and cultures as well as kind of what the design world has to offer you. So what made me really break into it is just I was just really passionate about it more than anything else. I think I had a real love and a desire to do well, and my thing was I wanted to make sure I was doing something that was practical. So, form over a kind of vanity, call it.
Yeah.
I wanted to have functional design ultimately. So that was my end goal. So whatever I designed had a purpose.
Yeah. So in the intro that I mentioned about you kind of getting an opportunity in industry, how did that come about? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was in my second year at uni and just finished up, and it was, remember it like it was yesterday, it was the 2012 Olympics. And my brother was working at an advertising agency in London, and he basically contacted his HR department and asked if I could do some work experience at an advertising agency with him. Um, and I was over the moon, to be honest, because I hadn't thought of taking the initiative myself, because I was quite happy just to enjoy my summer holidays
Yeah.
as most students. Um, but you know what? It was actually one of the best things that happened to me because I got a real taste for what life is like outside of a classroom or a formal education background when it comes to design. Because it really opened my eyes and it made me realize what design is like in the real world, which I'd never been exposed to up until then. So yeah, it was like that's what gave me a little bit of experience, and I got to work on some live briefs
Yeah.
and live circumstances, which was quite eye-opening actually because it was so fascinating to see what different disciplines people had and different specialisms. And I think up until that point, um, I was aware that people kind of were more strongly suited in certain areas, but I wasn't aware that you could have a level of specialism like that in industry too. I
Yeah,
believe that at the time it was like, master of none, jack of all trades, so to speak. Um, and it was quite nice to know that you could literally be a very specialist in a certain area and give 110%, and everything you output would be kind of top notch.
yeah.
Ultimately.
So, I suppose you were quite fortunate that you had a brother that actually managed to break into industry. And yeah, in terms of your brother, would you say your parents still had the same kind of? Because your brother's older than you, isn't he? So
Yeah,
I suppose like your parents would have had the same kind of thought process in your brother wanting to go the academic route as well.
definitely. I mean, as siblings, I think sometimes people are compared to one another.
Yeah,
It's the very organic thing. You want what's best for your children, but you do compare them to one another. My brother was very academic. He was very naturally gifted. Things came to him so easily, and it's it's amazing. I kind of wish I was like that. So for him, he could just get the right answer so quickly without even really having to put any much thought into it.
mm,
And I think that really helped him progress in his career. And I think my parents could definitely see that. So I think they didn't. I mean, they did question it at first, as they did for myself, because they were like, "Why are you not going down the route that we assumed that you would?"
mm,
Um, but at the same time, they were very supportive. And I
yeah,
think because my brother was already there and in the industry, doing obviously a slightly different role to myself, um, I think it made it easier to have those conversations and
yeah,
to not have to try and convince and really justify uh, the route that I was going down. Um, and because, like I said, my brother was already there, my parents felt a little bit more comfortable with me being able to kind of be in London because I'm not from London
yeah.
originally, um, and knowing that my brother was there to support me should I need it.
Okay. So I suppose because your parents from the working class background, having seen your brother progress in industry and actually gave them a bit of exposure of a world outside of work traditional working class jobs. Your kind of role was going into industry. There was less kind of anxious about you going into the world of work in a more professional setting. Then,
Yeah, I would say so. I guess it was the unknown more than anything else. They only knew what they knew because of the world in which they've worked in for so many years.
yeah,
They wanted what was best for us. And I guess when you come from a certain working class background and a certain ethnic background, I would say to a certain extent, um, you always aim high. You always want your children or family members to have the best job because back in the day it was like these jobs are the prospective jobs that will earn you a lot of money so you can have a better lifestyle.
mm,
And not to say that those things are not still applicable. However, that's all they knew. They just assumed that if you're a doctor or you work in finance or you work within any of those kind of technical, medical, mathematic fields, you bring in the money. Wouldn't say that's wrong. However, it's not the only way you can make money as well.
yeah,
Um, but I think there's two different things here. Obviously, like there was the pressure that people would get because that's what they believed was the right route, instead of giving their children and family members a choice of do something that you enjoy versus what we think is the right
yeah,
route
yeah,
for all your financial well-being going forward. So yeah, in short, I guess going back to the question, yeah, it was a little bit easier because they understood it from my brother's perspective.
yeah. I suppose, yeah, that I suppose that always makes it easier for the parent to see. Okay, there are career paths that are a lot
Yeah,
different. I suppose. So there's always that trope, isn't there, of people getting into creative industries. A case of it's not what you know, but it's who you know. And I suppose, well, your first this was more about the work experience that your brother
it was.
enabled
Yeah.
for you. Yeah. So would you agree with that comment or? Do you think?
I think it's a
Yeah,
mixture of the two, to be
yeah,
honest. Um, so if I go back to my very first job as an example, um, I didn't really know anybody. I applied for this job, shot in the dark, and I got it, and I was very fortunate. But I believe as the years have gone on, you network, you make connections, and jobs that I've got to date have all been through people that I've known,
yeah,
as well as what I know,
yeah,
and
yeah,
kind of portfolio of work, for example. But it is really handy to know people in industry because people help one another out in some way,
mm,
shape, or form. So I think for it in a creative industry, it is a combination of the two. Your work speaks for itself. Um, you have to be your own individual person, um, and obviously add value to any circumstance or situation because designers are now everywhere. You can find them, and there are some really talented designers. But what makes you different? What makes you stand out? What value can you add to a company that the next person can't? Um, and I think if you know a person, it allows you to separate from the masses ultimately.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think yeah, it's a happy balance between the two. I think you need to know what you're doing. You need to know the things to do your job. But if you know people, it makes your life easier.
yeah. So, I suppose so. Your first initial job into industry, you got that after off your own merit and off your own back.
Yeah. Looking back on it, I actually forgot that I applied for the job. But yeah, so I applied for it whilst I was still at university, and I had an interview post graduation, and I was just very fortunate enough that I got it. I think at the time I was just like in over my head. I was obviously overjoyous, but there was nobody I knew. I literally, you know, put my all into my portfolio and just committed and kind of went all in, and it paid off.
Yeah,
And I believe that since then it's kind of been very similar, but it's then been about networking because you grow and you understand how to navigate the industry a little bit more
yeah.
as time goes on.
Your first job, it was in London, wasn't it? So,
That's correct. Yeah.
and you're quite fortunate because your brother was in London at the time.
Yeah.
If you didn't have your brother down in London, how difficult would it have been for you starting out?
I think, well, the first thing is maybe I might not have been here. And the reason why is I was relatively apprehensive about moving to London.
Hmm.
Coming from the northwest of England, I had my um, I had a very different outlook on what London was like, coming from the northern parts. I wasn't too keen on like the fast-paced nature of it, the fact that people are quite grumpy, don't talk to one another, and I came from a relatively happy place in the country.
Yeah,
Um, but having my brother here really helped because he was just like, honestly, it's like the land of opportunity, call it. You'll find a job relatively quickly and you'll actually fall in love with it once you spend a bit of time here. Like, don't believe everything that you assume about London, and don't believe what other people may say, potentially family members who obviously are a bit stuck in their ways as well at
yeah,
times. Um, so it definitely made it easier. But if I hadn't had him here, I think the difficulty would have been I needed to kind of figure out where I wanted to go, how I was going to earn some money to be able to live in London.
hmm.
I don't think I would have been able to be in London without a job. But having my brother here allowed me to stay with him for a few months to find a job and
Yeah,
not have to worry about kind of any overhead costs at the
yeah,
time. So it was a great help. And obviously, for somebody that's not from London, it's a big ask. I know there's obviously a lot of people that live in and around London, and it's easy enough to commute to. But when you come from quite far away, unless you've got a job, I think the difficulty is like, how are you going to afford things if you
yeah,
don't have
yeah,
any money coming in?
yeah. So, would you say your working class roots was kind of why you're a bit apprehensive about coming down to London?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think it was more. I didn't know if the fast-paced nature of the city was for me. I'd lived in a
Yeah,
place where it was nowhere near as busy growing up. for at least the best part of 18 years of my life. University was different. You're in a little bit of a bubble at that
Mm.
point. You're part of society, but you're not. You're relatively disconnected unless you're in one of the larger cities. Um, but yeah, I think based on where I came from, I didn't think London was going to be work in my favor just because it's worlds apart from a lifestyle perspective.
Yeah.
And I guess the apprehension was, will I fit in?
Yeah.
Well,
True. No, I think that's the case with a lot of people moving down to London because it's quite a big ask.
yeah,
So a bit is bigger city, it's expensive, and those that come from other parts of the country, unless you have something in place, you do have to save up, and it is a big risk and gamble because sometimes it doesn't pay off. And I
yeah,
suppose now it's very different with people being able to remote work and stuff like that. But
yeah.
even then, companies are still asking people to come in, so you would
This
have
is
to
it.
live near to the offices and stuff.
Yeah, relatively close by to be able to still be able to commute in. Um, Kind of talking about kind of that, I think hybrid working and kind of working from home has been one of the best things that did come out of the pandemic, personally, because it actually gives people the opportunity to work from all over the world as well as all over the UK.
Mm.
Um, it was never the case back in the day, so that's why you had to up and leave and commit
Yeah,
to moving to another city. Whereas now you have a lot more flexibility. So, in the nicest way possible, it's a lot easier for people now.
yeah.
Yeah,
No, it's true. Worked at various places. Could you tell us a little bit about, because prior to this, we've talked about how you encountered the different kind of cultures of the company. Could you tell us a
yeah.
little bit about the culture and how some of them actually feels like there's no real need for like a box ticking exercises because it's kind of ingrained in that company.
Yeah. So, two of the last four companies I've worked at, there's definitely that thing of box ticking. Um, they, I mean, I think it stems from the core values of the company more than anything else,
Mm.
and I think purely American companies, weirdly. So the two American companies I ever worked for, they do they do this thing of obviously making sure they hire the right talent and the best talent, which is what you should always do anyway. But then it feels like there's like this underlying thing of, well, if we get a person of color or a person from a certain ethnic background, then it kind of helps balance things out.
Yeah,
Personally, I'm not too fussed by that because um, I've kind of been faced with things like this my whole life, weirdly. But two other companies that I've worked with where that's not even a thing, like the culture of a company where everyone gets along with everyone. There's such a diverse team. It's not like you have to try and you know make a quota just to make sure that
yeah,
it balances things out. And those are the places where I've probably loved the most. Well, I do love the most actually. I work for one of them right now, and it's all about the culture. It's all about diversity, and it's diversity in different ways, shapes, and forms. Whereas two other companies I worked for, it was
it was
literally a box ticking
it was
mechanic,
quite
and
explicit in what they were looking for. Yeah,
yeah, very explicit, and it was very evident when you kind of walked around the offices. It was very evident that you were a minority to a certain extent in this kind of large organization. Um, Possibly not intentional,
mm.
but it was something that probably was ingrained in the culture of the company because of potentially like a very conservative mentality because of how old these companies were and how
Yeah.
they've operated for so many years.
Okay, and in terms of class, is this something that you would kind of come across, or does it not really fit into like a creative? Because we've discussed, because we've talked about how in creative sectors you feel like there isn't much of a class in that sense.
No, I don't. I don't believe there is, and I think it's because everybody that works within the creative field is is from all different walks of life, and I think having people from all different walks of life and different backgrounds makes creativity so much better because you get different perspectives, you get a different um, a view on kind of creative. Um, and as we know, creative is very subjective. There's no real right or wrong answer. And I think that's what makes it such a good industry. Like there is a right way to do things to make sure it does the job.
Mm.
But when it comes to design and creativity, the sky's the limit. And I think these places where there is, well, everywhere I've worked where there's not really a class divide, I think that's where the best creative comes out of it because it's like a melting pot of cultures and
So
and,
everyone's
and
very
people
inclusive of the different.
very inclusive. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like you pick from different people's backgrounds and different ways of working, different experiences, different strengths, and you put it all together and you get some great creative. But there has been, going back to that question, so I know there's been class. I think I've noticed class more as I've got older and as I've moved from different companies, and it stems back to that culture of companies.
yeah,
So some companies, it's part and parcel of their culture. They're just very diverse, and then others, it's like you can see the divide in class. You can see that there's a certain group of people that will work in a certain role, or it's never been within my kind of creative studio or
yeah,
creative teams, but it's been teams that I've worked with, and it's very evident.
yeah,
You get a very kind of clicky mentality, call it, but it's a very much so different class divide. Um, and again, you can see it. You don't
yeah.
without even having kind of asked them that question of if you were to, kind of what are your backgrounds and
You
whatnot.
can just tell
You
instantly.
could just
Yeah,
tell. Yeah, you can tell just based on conversation, based on how people kind of hold themselves, and it's just maybe something that I've become a little bit more privy to and kind of aware of,
yeah,
just based on my background. I come from a working class background in a very, you know, working class town. And it's very evident that whenever you move away from that town or are exposed to people that are not from there, you can see the
yeah,
difference
yeah, yeah.
based on conversation, how people hold themselves, etc. So yeah,
So I suppose you have a bit of an advantage then, where you kind of utilize it, like because you can instantly tell, okay, these aren't from similar background to me.
yeah,
I know how to hold myself in conversations and stuff like that.
I believe so. I mean, I'd say it's something that I can use to my advantage for sure. But I can't say I'm always 100% right either,
Yeah,
because there's been instances where I've really misread a situation, and again, maybe it's just my assumptions just based on the past. But I would say 70% of the time, I could definitely tell the difference quite easily. Um, and I don't think it's any person's fault either, because if a person has grown up in a certain area, like a person is a product of their environment, they've not been exposed to other kind of cultures, classes, whatever that
yeah,
may be. They're none the wiser. So I can't blame these types of people, um, but you can definitely tell is the point,
yeah,
And I think being from where I'm from, it's kind of a mixture of understanding the class system, but also being like that street smart mentality.
you mentioned that there was a difference within in-house and agency. Could you tell us a little bit about that, and for those that don't know what the differences are?
Yeah, so in-house is where you work within the design field within a company itself. So like Disney, your PlayStation, etc. Like all the designers are within that particular company. But an agency works with other companies, and they do a plethora of different things from design to video editing to storyboarding to strategy, whatever it may be, and they do it for a variety of different clients. Um, so the work experience that I got when I worked at agency was my kind of, I wouldn't say reality check, but it really exposed me to what industry was like at the time. And I think I didn't like the frantic nature of it. And there was also this thing of you could tell that there was a massive class divide there.
Mm.
Um, and at the time, I wasn't too sure, but I was like, okay, this is interesting. I didn't feel like I fitted in at the time. And then I moved into an in-house role at Yahoo, and that was one of my first jobs. And it was two ends of the spectrum when it came to the people that I work with.
Hmm.
There was maybe a little bit of a class divide to a certain extent, but it wasn't as prevalent. And I believe that lots of people that work in agency are from very, you know, middle class, upper class backgrounds to a certain extent, um, and it's like it's very much so based on who you know
Yeah,
versus what you know at times. Um, but that was back then. Whether that's the case now, I don't know. But there was like a level of nepotism,
yeah,
and there was people that were relatives of the CEOs or of the company owners that worked within the industry, and they had jobs because they were related, and they
yeah,
weren't there based on merit. And that's something I noticed in just a week's time that I was there, but also based on uh, years of experience up until now because I've worked with agencies and I've I know people that are related to certain agencies to a certain extent, and it was just a bit of an eye opener because I mean, just coming from where I'm from, like I personally believe like jobs should be based on merit, but also at the same time, as we alluded to earlier, it's about who you know too. But I think it was a lot more of there was a lot more of people that were related to the founders of an agency
yeah.
in agency versus
So it's a lot more
just
prevalent. Yeah.
a lot more prevalent. Yeah,
Okay. So yeah, it's interesting because like your brother's still in. He works in agency environment, so it's quite
he does.
interesting the fact that you're working in house and he's working agency side, and um, yeah, that's quite interesting.
It
Uh,
is. I think it's an interesting one because we do have conversations every now and again, and I think we are very similar, but we are very different at the same time,
yeah,
especially on our outlook on life. And I think it's because the differences we have within the creative industry.
yeah,
Um, you know, his role requires him to come up with strategies. Mine is somebody that comes does the work based on the strategy. So we're obviously I wouldn't say we're worlds apart, but we have slightly different outlooks on how we approach things.
yeah,
And obviously, he's always worked in agency, and he thrives from it. Whereas I like guardrails. I like to have a level of structure. I
yeah,
don't like to be working on different things every 10 minutes.
yeah,
And I think design is everyone treats design very different in the creative industry in a different manner. And I think there's nothing wrong with it. Like everyone, I think that's the beauty of creative industry. It's very diverse. You can have people that really love agency, and there's some people that don't. I just happen to be one that doesn't.
yeah. No, it's good. I think it kind of needs to be made more known to people the difference between the two ways of getting into industry and the
Yeah,
different places that you can be working at. Because I don't think many people realize you do have the in-house versus the agency style of
yeah,
working, and I think especially those coming from working class backgrounds, if there is the sense of like guardrails and you've got a structure to your day, that might bode well for people from working class backgrounds because they know the routine, they know exactly. But if you're working in an agency where it can be a bit hectic, it might take someone completely out of their comfort zone. Is that something you would agree with?
yeah. I definitely agree with that. I think that's exactly what it kind of did for me. I think I've got like a form of OCD where I need to level the structure in my mind and kind of in how I approach things.
Yeah.
And only being able to spend a little bit of time here, a little bit of time there on different jobs. Um, it was this thing of like I needed to finish what I was working on before I worked on the next project,
Hmm.
or whatever it may be, and it really didn't kind of bode well for me because I got quite anxious, I guess, more than
Yeah.
anything else. It's like, I didn't have the satisfaction I needed of completing something because I knew that I still had to go back to it. But then at the same time, I was working on something else. You know, I do sometimes get that in house too,
Yeah.
but the structure is more you work on a project. Once that project's done, you move on to the next. And they give you enough time. I think one of the things about in-house is there's not as many pressures as you would get as an agency.
Yeah.
It's like it is pretty much a 9 to 5 job. You wake up, you go to work, you do your thing, and you clock off at that time. I think sometimes agency has a very different outlook on things, and it's like depending on if you're pitching, and if you need to get something across the line, you sometimes have to slog it out for
Yeah.
until the late hours, and I just don't think that's healthy. I think it's I don't know how I don't know if it's still happening right now in this kind of working from home era that we're in, or I could imagine it is because it's more convenient. So people don't
Mm.
have to be slogging out all those extra hours in an office. But it's some things like that that I wasn't too keen on personally, and that's why I prefer in-house because it gives me a better balance for my work-life balance, basically.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I think yeah, I think it'll definitely help people, especially getting into industry, starting out to be fully aware of the differences between the two.
I think one of the things about it is, though, I think, and then again, back when I was at university, at least, there was a lot. I wouldn't say pressure, but the tutors at the time were pushing students to go more down the agency route because they believe that if you want to be more creative, this is the route that you go down. You go to like little design firms or design agencies. But there's never any conversations about joining a large organization and working in
Yeah.
house. Either the lecturers themselves or the tutors never had done that,
Okay.
or they just didn't have an opinion on it. So they never chose to have those conversations. And I think on reflection, I think about it, it's like I had some wonderful tutors and lecturers, um, but I think there was something lacking when it came to industry from an education perspective.
Yeah.
And I think if they were able to do more of that, and kind of encourage more different styles of roles, I guess, for an industry role, then it gives people a bit more confidence because I think there was a lot of people that I remember studying with that didn't feel confident that they were able to get an actual job when they graduated, even though they did well.
Yeah.
And I think it's because maybe agency wasn't for them, or the little design firms wasn't for them.
Yeah.
But again, just awareness.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because it's like, yeah, it could end up being off-putting for some people because working in a big company, how did you find that? Was that quite daunting for you to go in because you're
We,
working with multiple people and stuff like that?
yeah, I mean, I think for my first job, yes, because it was my first job ever, and working in an industry. So I was a little bit flustered at times. I was figuring out things as I went along. Um, and as somebody that's a junior, you do that. You know, you do whatever's asked of you. You figure it out. You have to put in extra hours at times just to kind of prove yourself.
Hmm.
But I think as the years went on, it became easier because I got used to working with large groups of people, and I think progressively I've moved to larger and larger
Yeah.
companies, and it was quite part and parcel of the industry, really. I've not known anything different since I started working.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite an easy enough transition. I think if you're a very personable person, it's significantly easier because you
Yeah.
can have conversations with people. But if you are to be a little bit more reserved, um, I wouldn't kind of say be apprehensive about it. I was just like, just find your lane,
Yeah.
do what's best for you. I wouldn't kind of shy away from it because I know myself right now. I work with people that are very introverted or very reserved in comparison to me.
Yeah.
Um, but we work in a large team and we get along very well. It's just what you make of it more than anything
Yeah.
else is how I would say.
Yeah, because the reason I asked that, I think traditionally when people you hear from working class backgrounds, if they're working in like retail or in a trade or wherever, it's very very small teams of people that they're working with traditionally, and I
Yeah,
think it's not until you you are working in a professional career that you are going to be exposed to big corporations where you are working with a lot of people. So I think, yeah, like you said, I think people, if they're a bit more aware about it, then it gives them a bit more food for thought and they can kind
I
of
agree.
work
Yeah.
out for themselves. Um, Touching upon the education aspect, as I mentioned in the intro, you don't feel like university is really prevalent. Is that something you still agree with?
I do and I don't. I think, I mean, I think I'll think about it from my own perspective here. So I never actually wanted to go to university. At 18, when I got my A levels, I was quite happy to, I still wanted to do graphic design, and work down a design route, but I was quite happy to try and get myself a job in an agency or a firm or somewhere, just doing a design job and working my way up and learning that way. Because at the time, I didn't believe education was going to really help me. You know, I think I was trying to be quite practical in my thing. I was like, well, I don't want any student loans. I don't want to have this the burden of debt for the next 25 years or however long it is now. Um, and I was just like, I just want to work. I was like, what can university give me that I can't get from working? Obviously, I now know what university can
Yeah,
give
yeah,
you that work can't. And I think university was the best 3 years of my life, still to this day. So I think university is very important, but not just from an education perspective, but from a life experience
yeah,
perspective. And that's why I think students should go to university. They should, you know, have learned to be independent and enjoy what it has to offer. Obviously, I don't know what students and universities are like these days, but if it is as good as what I remember it, then I think everyone will have a great time, depending on what they do or whatever they do, really, because it's what you make of it, right?
yeah,
But on the same side, I think education, from a design perspective, anyway, doesn't have to be at a university. So, I mean, you can go to university, you can do, whatever degree you wish to do, but it shouldn't stop you from doing something you may be passionate about. And I think maybe something like a short-term course could do the same things as 3 years in university.
mm,
Um, I think about a colleague of mine that I work with. She studied history at university and didn't really want to do that when she graduated. Like, she didn't want to be a historian. She didn't want to do anything in it. I think she worked in marketing for a while because that's what most people in marketing do. They get a degree from somewhere and go, right, I'm going to work in marketing.
yeah.
Something that I've seen many times over the years. Um, but she then went to Shillington College and did a 3 month kind of full time course and learned everything, if not more than what I learned at
Yeah.
university in the space of 3 months, had a portfolio of work, and was able to get a job kind of immediately
All
after
right.
this 3 month course. And I, and this is just based on conversations I had with her at the time. She learned a lot more than I would have done in the 3 years I was there because they gave them very practical design courses.
Yeah.
So working with industry, doing kind of live briefs that an industry would do. So it allowed them to actually get a taste for what it was like, what studying versus studying the basics of design and or whatever kind of design foundation you're from or discipline you're from. Um, and those 3 months, yes, okay, it might cost a little bit of money,
Yeah.
but it's short term pain for a long term
Well,
gain
well,
at the end of the day.
I suppose because university fees are now like over 9 grand a year. So this,
Exactly.
I'm guessing, this 3 month course is going to be way cheaper than.
Way
Yeah.
cheaper, way cheaper than that. You have kind of similar to what you would at university, right? You would have a class that you'll work with
Yeah.
on a day to day project basis. Um, but it was all practical from what I hear. And when I think about the work that she produced when I worked with her, she was 10 times better designer than I was. But that was just my thoughts on it. But we were both very different designers,
Mm,
and I just think to myself, I credit Shillington and that university or that college, however, or course discipline, for them being able to do these kind of fast track 3 month courses, and then the work that comes out of it is like top tier, and it's
yeah.
something that any industry, any company would want to kind of hire from. And I personally think that if you didn't want to go down the formal education route, which again isn't for everyone, I think a course like that would be suffice to get you into industry and give you a real taste for what industry and what design is
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
in the real world versus a formal education way. Because I think back on it and at university, and there's a lot of things I learned, which is great, like color theory and various other things, and like life drawing, but I've never had to use those types of skills
Yeah.
in industry because it's foundational design, and I think it's always good to understand these things. But I think practicality is something that I believe is more necessary if you're going to have a formal education.
Okay. No, it is interesting because it's always fascinating when I speak to people about is education still worth it? And yeah, there's always the pros and cons, and
Yeah,
like yeah, a couple of people have said the life of going to university is always a good thing. But yeah, I think with the amount it costs now, like 9 grand a year compared to this colleague of yours doing a
yeah,
short course. I think financially, I think people will probably start to seek stuff like that where they'll know they'll get something out of it much
yeah,
sooner, especially with people struggling at the minute.
yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, definitely with the cost of living right now, university doesn't seem a very financially viable option at times.
Mm,
Okay, yes, you don't have to pay it back as soon as you graduate, but you will be paying it back for a number of years. I think I was quite fortunate. I was of the era where, if you don't pay it off in 25 years, it gets wiped clean. Whereas I believe like some of the new student loans rules are ultimately you'll be paying it off until you retire.
yeah,
There's no kind of set years that you have to pay it off by. So, unless you get a good job and you're able to pay it off, manually to kind of avoid the demands of the interest rates that student loans have. This is one of the reasons why I personally believe that formal education isn't the right route. But then at the same time, it is for the life experience and everything else that comes with it. So it's, again, like we said, pros and cons. But these short-term courses would be very beneficial to somebody that just wanted to get into the industry and be willing to commit for a very short period of time
yeah.
to know that they're going to have a job or find a job relatively easily after it.
Yeah, we're coming up towards the end of the conversation. Is there anything you were kind of any like final thoughts or any advice you would give to those from working class or low socioeconomic backgrounds?
Um, just keep at it, personally. I think for me, I get a level of imposter syndrome at times. I believe that I'm not capable of doing what I do, but I don't. But then at the same time, I get told by friends, family, and colleagues that I wouldn't be where I am if I wasn't capable of doing what I do.
Yeah,
I think it's very natural when somebody's come from kind of nothing to a certain extent,
yeah,
um, and I think it's a class thing, really, at times. Um, when you work with people that are of different classes to you, I think sometimes you think you're maybe not good enough, but you definitely are. You just got to kind of fight through it, power through it, and just make sure you have the support of your friends and family and your peers to
yeah.
make to back you up. So, for anybody that's from a working class background, just you put your best foot forward and keep doing it. And you literally the world's your oyster. You can literally do anything you want as long as you put your mind to it.
Yeah, no, that's some great advice there, and yeah, thanks for having the chat. It's been great and insightful as well. Like I think, especially with the agency and in-house, I think there's a lot of people aren't aware that they're actually really different roles.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so thanks again. Is there any like, do you have any like socials or do you have an online portfolio people can check out your work and stuff?
Yeah, so well, my online portfolio is kind of offline at the moment, unfortunately, but I do have social, so you can find me on Jugular18
Okay.
on Instagram, and I'm available on LinkedIn too. So just find me at J Mystery, and my job's a senior digital designer. So if you wanted to check me out, feel free to add me up.
Cool. Cheers. For that. I'll put your links in the description so people can just check you out on there. But yeah, thanks again for the interviews. It's great. Yeah, it's good to get your insight into that. And yeah, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Initial Step. If you resonate with the stories we share and have a similar background you'd like to talk about, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch and maybe you'll be featured in an upcoming episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. And be sure to check out our previous episodes for more inspiring stories. And until next time, I'll see you on the next one.